Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite, or whatever the case may be. My name is Marcus, and I am the host of the Black Brazil Today YouTube channel, as well as the blackbraziltoday.com blog, where I analyze Brazil from the perspective of race. So today I'm going to, I think I've discussed this topic before. I'm going to approach it again today because it is it's fascinating. When you start studying, racial issues in Brazil, you're going to come across this topic often. And as I've been, looking at race in Brazil for 22 or 23 years, I've noticed the transitions that have gone on. You've had, and you still have a lot of people who probably 20 years ago would have considered themselves mixed or brown or even white, coming to accept a Black identity. For all of those years, and still today, you have people on opposing sides of this fence that says, one side says you're only Black if you're the darkest skinned person with, the tightest coil of hair. Then you have others who say, well, there's many tonalities, there's many hair textures, facial features, and skin colors within that Black category. So depending on which side you fall, you either believe that there's about 18 to 20 million Blacks in Brazil, to as high as 120 million. And, for me, I fall somewhere in the middle because, having lived in Brazil for 9 years and having visited the country for, over 20 years, I've seen, hundreds of phenotypes where I can honestly say, although there are millions of people who I can say whatever degree of racial admixture they have, I can see them just being Black for all intents and purposes. Then there are other people who, in this category that's defined as pardo, meaning brown or mixed, some people are just, you really can't define them according to just one racial category. So looking at race in Brazil, there has always been this comparison with the United States. Like Brazil and many countries in Latin America, the idea is that the ideologies of race and classification in Latin America, specifically Brazil, are completely opposite from the United States. In the United States, a person can look almost white or pretty much white, but if it's discovered that that person has any African ancestry, I've seen people being classified as legally Black for being 132nd Black. There's actually a case, I don't know, probably from the 80s that showed that, this woman was clearly white, but because she had clearly 132nd of Black ancestry, literally one drop, and she was classified as Black on her legal documents. So it's just something that, Americans are accustomed to. Now, I have to say, it's pretty ridiculous to me that you're going to define somebody as Black because they might have one drop of Black blood. Where it gets confusing is that people will say that if you define mixed people as being Black, then that is also part of the one dropism type of rule. And I don't necessarily agree with that. If a person who just who can have whatever degree of African ancestry, if they just look completely white and you wouldn't even be able to tell if they didn't say anything, then that person is white to me. I see discrimination. Race is often based on just the level of discrimination that people will experience based on what they look like. So what I find in the United States and also Brazil is that, okay, if we can look at you and see that you are not clearly white, even if we can't necessarily tell what you are, you're going to fit in the non-white category. And I say that, and I stand by my words, that's also true in Brazil. I think people are more, how can I say, this idea of passing in Brazil is not even necessary because it's just kind of known that, most people in Brazil have some degree of African ancestry, whether we're talking, one, half Black, a quarter Black, 1/8 Black, 1/12 Black, 1/16, whatever. It's generally understood that, according to some studies, at least 85% of Brazilians carry at least 10% of African DNA. So it would make sense that the parameter of whiteness would have to be wider in Brazil in order for people to be considered white at all. I have to make it clear again, I'm not a person who believes in one dropism, but I do believe that if a person shows signals in their physical attributes of African ancestry is not necessarily how close to white they are, but maybe how far away from whiteness that they are. That's the way I see it. I see it, if people look at you and say, I can tell you have African ancestry, then the racial privileges associated with whiteness do not occur, regardless of whether you have a white parent. You know, that whiteness is not bestowed on you, where you get all of the privileges that are, you know, supposedly connected to whiteness. So what I'm seeing flipping in Brazil now is that it's always been the opposite of how Americans understand race. But what I'm seeing is that since affirmative action quotas got on the table back in the early 2000s, things are changing, because when the discussion of quotas first came up, a couple of the arguments that you would hear in Brazil was that, well, that's going to diminish education. If people can get in by getting extra points on through quotas, and that's going to diminish the education, which hasn't proven to be true, because people getting into the universities in Brazil through the quota system are showing that they do as well in college as do the people who did not get in on quota. So they totally debunked that idea. But the second thing is, Brazilians always said that, how can we apply affirmative action quotas when so many people in Brazil have African ancestry? Who can we say is black? Can we tell who's black and who's not? So for years, I spent, years reading the comments of people in social networks, online and blogs or whatever. And people would commonly say, like, if Brazil was classified according to the one drop rule, like the United States, to say even I would be considered white or considered black. Brazilians have always rejected the idea that African ancestry automatically makes you black. It's been totally rejected. I understand that to a degree. I mean, as I said, I don't agree in complete one-dropism. I think that's absurd, to have 1/32 of your ancestors being black, and all of that makes you black. That sounds absurd to me. I mean, say you think that, African DNA is that powerful that one ancestor out of 32 makes somebody black. But what I'm seeing is that, because since there's been quotas on the table, we're seeing an increase in Brazilians who have most of their lives considered themselves white. But as soon as there's quotas on the table to be received to help them get into the university, suddenly they're claiming, well, I have a black grandmother, I have a black grandfather, my great grandfather, whoever. And all of a sudden, that same African ancestry that they were defining through their whole lives, to avoid being categorized as non-white, now they want to bring out this black grandparent to use this person in order to justify the reason why they need quotas to get into the universities, right? So this is something that has switched. There's been just numerous cases of people taking advantage of quotas through fraud. If I was just to look at a couple of these, right? This is something that I've covered for a number of years, to the point that, look at this piece right here. Due to the phenomenon of white students declaring themselves black, the Coletiva Negrada launches a campaign against fraud and racial quotas. They actually have to have people who are looking into beneficiaries of the quota system to see what these people look like. Like, if you look like just a white person in society, then why should you be able to get quotas? And they're just finding people, just numerous persons over the years, and probably in the thousands now, who've been caught trying to take advantage of the quota system by claiming that they're black or even just brown. Here's another case. I know I look white, but I'm actually black. So this same group denounced 40 cases of fraud and racial quotas at the Federal University in the state of Espírito Santo, which is in the southeast of the country. This is another famous case. This woman says, I'm black. I mean, look at how she looks on the left. It's almost like she's wearing blackface or something. And then this is what she looks like. She used quota to get into, I think it was the Federal Police Department. And she says, I'm black. Woman accused of committing fraud after entering a university through affirmative action, even though she doesn't look black. I mean, I was amazed. I'm like, what did she do to make herself look this way? And then in her everyday life, this is what she looked like on the right. Like, that's clearly not a black woman. I mean, even here, it looks like she did something artificial in order to make herself appear to be black. This guy has red hair. And what does he say? He says, my grandmother is black. It's a case of fraud to enter university in Bahia. This guy artificially, I don't know what he did, if he's using a mask or he colored his skin. I have to look into this article because it's from 2019. But he artificially darkened his skin and got fired from his job because of fraud. Then you have this group of students, and it's a difficult question. What may be black or brown for one person might be, well, this person looks white to me for somebody else. So these students were left out of affirmative action quotas to get into universities. Students disapproved by University Quota Commission protest. According to Commission of Racial Self-Declaration, students were not black or brown enough. Let me see what else. Black activists of Federal University occupied dean's office against destruction of racial quota policy. Should a white grandchild of a black grandparent be allowed access to affirmative action, which is the case that this is part of the article that I'm going to be talking about today, this very topic. For years, Brazilians have dismissed the classification that they could have of blackness because they have African ancestry 2 or 3 generations back. But all of a sudden now, when they see the opportunity of getting quotas and being able to get into a university, now they want to claim that black grandparent rather. Members of Affirmative Action Judgment Committee at university quit after dean declares that anyone with a black grandparent is eligible for quotas. So we can see this has led to some, quotas have already led to division in Brazil, but it gets worse when you see people, judges getting involved and judges seeing one side or the other. Like, having a black grandparent allows you to claim your quota. Others saying that doesn't apply in Brazil. African descended when convenient. It's something that people call afro-convenient. It's like they become black or brown when it's convenient for them. This candidate here says he's brown or pardo, which is, the term for brown or mixed race in Brazil. So he calls himself brown to enter a career in Brazil's foreign ministry through racial quotas. He gets barred, but he gets an injunction. So this is what's funny is that there are white Brazilians who you can look at and say, this dude has some degree of admixture in his family. He still looks like a white guy to me, but I'm saying he's going to define himself as a pardo or brown in order to take advantage of the quota system. Doctor declares himself black and passes in the first place in selection process through system of quotas. There's actually a guy on here. It's not popping up right now, but this dude clearly had like white skin and he even had green eyes, but he was trying to get, in through the quota system. Popular white DJ defined herself as brown or pardo to enter college. Okay, so these are just a couple of the articles that I have covered. There's more if you look at you do a keyword search on quotas, Brazil, and fraud. Look, USP, which is Brazil's most prestigious university, it investigated 193 denunciations or denouncements of fraud in the quota system. USP, same university, expelled 6 students from the course for fraud and quotas. What else do we have? Let me see. Maybe I want to just look at, because I could go on and on. Denouncements of fraud and racial quotas lead to 163 expulsions in federal universities. So as I said, by now it's probably in the thousands how many people have lost their spots in a university when it was found that they're not actually black or brown. Here's another one, the University of Brasilia in the nation's capital. They evaluated 90 denouncements and punished 25 students. What else do we have here? Let's look at a couple of the pictures. Again, what have we here? This is the same guy that I did a story on. Oh, my grandmother is black. Let me see. This is the fight against quota fraud. This is the same girl. Like I said, it looks like she's wearing blackface to me. I could be wrong. I don't know how she artificially darkened her skin. This is the guy that I was saying who he actually has green eyes. In this picture, you can actually see, man, maybe he is slightly mixed. But the question would be, let's take a closer look at this picture. The question would be, does this guy look black enough for you that he should be a beneficiary of the quota system? This is something that's been going on for years, people frauding the system. My grandmother is black. Let's see, this is the same guy. He's a redhead, All right. So this is something that's been going on for a number of years. This since it's almost like people are like, if I can't beat them, I'll join them. You know, they wouldn't allow me to get quotas just as a white person. So I'm going to switch my identity and then, you know, claim my black grandmother in order to take advantage of this quota system. So today I'm going to look at a material by this guy who calls himself Levi, what's it, Kakiki. And this is his Instagram page. So this is what he's talking about in his article. He's just talking about how having a black grandmother does not necessarily make you black. It might make you black, but it might not. You know, the score is different in Brazil. You know, it's always been said, according to a sociologist named Horaci Nogueira back in the 50s or 60s, he said, Brazil's prejudice is based on how you look versus your ancestry. So this was he really broke it down really well. These just some of the same things that I've been talking about for a number of years. So I just wanted to highlight this article that he did. So why having a black grandmother doesn't make you black? Okay. Again, take it from the Levi Kaki F Instagram page. So to introduce the topic, this is what he says. Very often we see white people evoking the fact that they are descended from black people to claim their blackness. This is even a very common argument among quota fraudsters. In this post, which we made a few years ago in partnership with the Pretitudes Instagram page, you will understand a little bit of why this discourse is wrong. So these are the posts that he made. I'm just going to translate them. And he says what I just said a few minutes ago, our racism, that of Brazil, is of mark, not origin. It's more based on what you look like than your ancestry. So we're talking about, is it racism or identity according to how you look, mark, or of your origin? I will explain. Social scientist Horaci Nogueira says that Brazil has its own characteristics in racial identification. The idea that a drop of black blood makes you black is a characteristic that is restricted to American society. The racist act is influenced by your features. If you are black and have a white mother, it does you no good. If you present Negroid traits, you become a target. Your blood matters little. In Brazil, racism is directed at your features. As far as we can see, it is more related to your social reading or how the society sees you. This is something that I said either in my last video or the previous one. You know, I'm not going to argue about who should be defined as white or black. What does society say? That's often how it plays out in Brazil. So this is what he's saying. This idea of one drop of black blood is something that applies to specifically American society. It really has no place in Brazil, even though there are hints. I'll have to cover that in another piece, because in some areas of Brazilian society, you do find a type of one-dropism. You know, this is something that I found in a book by, I can't remember the author's name, but it was a book about, you know, how prejudice works in Brazil. And she found these certain laws within these certain societies in which you had to prove, I think, back to 3 or 4 generations that you were free of African ancestry. So Brazil has had its actual own one-drop rule. It's not something that was widespread. And for the most part, it just doesn't apply because, again, if one drop was applied in Brazil, 85% of the population would be considered black. Blood is not your black card. That's what he says here. Sangue não é negro card. In Brazil, the classification that is given to the mestiço, the person of mixed race, is a chromatic racial classification based on the mark and the color of the skin and not on blood ties. This discourse has already been evoked, and there has been scientific research defending that in Brazil, almost everyone is of black descent and biologically black. However, blackness is mostly thought of through a social reading. The police do not analyze who is black by a clinical examination, but by their traits and identified reading. This discourse of I have a black relative, I am black, can end up strengthening only one of the groups, the racist. The idea of equality between groups doesn't come from today. The famous sociologist, anthropologist, social critic, author, Gilberto Freire sowed the seed. The Brazilian state reinforced it, and so did the dictatorship. Gilberto Freire is famous for a book called The Masters and the Slaves that came out in 1933. And he was arguing that Brazil, he didn't use this term. People credit him with the term racial democracy, but he didn't actually coin that term. But his book very much so used the idea of miscegenation and these what harmonious relationships between white slave owners and black slaves to say Brazil doesn't have these racial problems. It's a source of our strength. And that's actually, that's kind of a stretch because Brazil has some of the most brutality, the brutal treatment of black slaves throughout its history. So that's something that can be disputed. The discourse of we are all black in the end only serves to deflate the discussion and bring a false social feeling that we are all equal, going through the same challenges and that racism acts equally with everyone. So we are all black. It's like we are all equal. And there's several articles that I have on the blog where I talk about Brazilians are often quick. I don't know so much now, but I know like 10 years ago, it seemed like every time there was a racist incident, people would automatically just spit out the term, nós somos todos iguais, we're all equal. Like, well, why are you saying that in a moment of racism when racial discrimination shows that people are not treated equally? And yet the same black person who was the victim of that discrimination will immediately blurt out, we are all equal. Really? In the end, this discourse only reinforces the idea of racial democracy, and then comes the question, why talk about racism if biologically we are all equal and have the same abilities? In the 2000s, there was a research on genetic mapping and that everyone was descended from black people. Do you know what it was used for? It was used to oppose racial quotas. So it's like, again, if you can't beat them, join them. Okay, well, since black and brown people are getting quotas in the university, then why don't we all be black? We all have African ancestry. So now we're all black. And this is what you're seeing playing out when people start to fraud the system by saying I have a black grandparent that should qualify me for quotas. Again, when people dismiss that African ancestry for years, but now there's an advantage to having some African ancestry and people want to use it for their own advantages, right? There are also shades of white. There are countless shades of whiteness too. Colorism is being used as a black card by people who try to force a social reading of themselves as black, but who are socially aware that racism doesn't interfere in their daily lives. Negritude for affectivity. To be white, you don't need to be Caucasian. Yes, it is possible to have black parents, grandparents, or a black partner, and this does not make you a black person. Being black goes through the fields of reading and living. Blackness is something that is independent of you in the physical aspect. You don't choose to be, you just are. You choose to be anti-racist and fight together with those who suffer from it. But your solidarity and watching violations closely will not turn you into a black person. Okay, listen to that again. You choose to be an anti-racist and fight together with those who suffer, but your solidarity and watching violations closely will not turn you into a black person. So how do you identify blacks in Brazil? The social definition of black people in Brazil, according to my observations, goes through 3 elements: ancestry, phenotypes, and social reading. Note that these elements blend together in different situations. Never only one of these identifications will identify you as black. It will always be mixed with the others. That's something I totally agree with. Ancestry refers to your ancestry. Are you the son or grandson of black people? If so, there is a chance that you are a black person, but this does not mean that you automatically are. After all, I have European ancestry, yet I cannot call myself a white man. That's something that I've argued for a while, not dismissing, black is black, but we know that it's been said that from Canada all the way down to Argentina, people of African descent are all mixed to some degree. And, the way that discrimination works, it doesn't really matter how black, how much European DNA you might have. It's what you're seeing. That non-white attribute that makes you a possible victim of racial discrimination. I remember a case some years ago. Let me see if I can pull this up. So I remember this case from back in like 2007, where they were doing these DNA tests down in Brazil. They were real popular. I remember Henry Louis Gates was doing these programs some years ago. measuring how European, African, or Native American, African Americans were. So they did the same thing in Brazil in 2007. And they did some genetic testing on a number of famous Black Brazilians. And it came with some really interesting results. Now, I want to just say up front, I don't necessarily buy these DNA tests because if you remember, I think it's 23andMe, the founder of 23andMe, his last name was Kittles. And he admitted on 60 Minutes some years ago that, those DNA tests don't really tell you much. When confronted with the idea like, well, I think they were saying like these DNA tests can tell you about 4 out of 1,000 of your ancestors. And so that doesn't really give you a clear percentage. Basically the articles that I have read before said that the science simply isn't there to calculate what percentage you are African, European, Native American, or, Asian, whatever it might be. So then, it just makes me really question, how legitimate are these tests? But here's what I'm getting at. Neguinho da Beija-Flor is a popular and a long-time Carnival samba singer. This is the guy right here. You look at Neguinho da Beija-Flor and you say, well, this looks like just a straight up Black guy. You'd be surprised if he had any admixture, right? But according to the study, it says Neguinho da Beija-Flor has more European DNA or genes than African. He was, the study came to say that, what is it? Neguinho da Beija-Flor was supposed to be 67.1% European. And it's just the point of, take a look at this guy. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I do question the validity of these DNA tests. That's just me from the things that now, if somebody can show me where I'm wrong, present the evidence. But I'm just saying what I have come across is to say that the science is not there to give us percentages of, our genetic breakdown according to region in the world. So that's what I've come across. So let me get back to this story. So what he's saying here is that, if you're going to get attacked by, a police officer or something, they're not going to ask you to pull out your DNA card and say, look, I'm 67% European. And that's going to stop them from, either killing you or beating you down. Of course, we see police brutality going rampant. And I've said this 100 times, as much as police brutality is highlighted in the United States, it doesn't compare to how many Black people get killed by police in Brazil. I haven't really even touched on that topic on my YouTube channel, but there's numerous articles on the blog, and one of these days I'm gonna have to introduce this topic on the YouTube page. So let me see. So what do you say? After all, I have European ancestry, and yet I cannot call myself a white man. It's not based on your DNA breakdown, even if we could prove percentages down to a percent like they say that they can do, which, like I said, I don't really buy it. Racism in Brazil is episodic. It's not genetic. If you have white skin and European traits, society will treat you as white, regardless of the color of your parents' skin. Now, let me see here. There was a point. Some people distinguish between being white and Caucasian. And they, a lot of Brazilians are of the opinion that, like, okay, they have white people, that they don't have Caucasian people. When they think of Caucasians, they think of people like British people or American whites, where Brazil's white is simply not equal to that. Even though people define themselves as white, they're not white in the European or North American sense, right? What else we have here? So phenotypes. The phenotype refers to the color of your skin and your features. Dark skin, a broad nose, thick lips, cabello crespo, which means kinky curly hair, cause you to be perceived as a Black person. Although, as I said before, possessing one trait or another doesn't make you Black. The social reading. Last but extremely important is the social reading. How does society read you? The more Black phenotypes you possess, the greater the chances that society will read you as a Black person. And this is something that I've talked about, a lot. It's not just about how I see it, because we could disagree, but how does the group categorize any particular person? Group observation. Since we are talking about racial groups and social reading, this analysis can be done through group observation. That is, to which social group do you believe you belong to? Where do you feel comfortable and welcome? At the same time, in order not to contribute to afro-convenience, again, people declaring themselves African descendants, when it's beneficial to them. We need to analyze whether the social group to which you believe you belong recognizes you as a member. Diversity. There is no exact analysis of someone's blackness. We need to use common sense and, above all, caution. Don't allow whites to be disrespectful to our struggle, but at the same time, let's not close ourselves into a single black-white skin tone or a single ancestral trait. We are diverse. Okay, I think he broke it down pretty well. It definitely goes along. It's my same train of thought and how I've had to break down the racial issue and how it pertains to Brazil. So these are a few comments of people who checked out the post that he made on this topic. So this is, I just translated a couple of the comments here. The first person says, "I totally agree. My paternal grandfather was black, but I am not. I have never been confused with a black person. I have never suffered any prejudice or racial discrimination. How could I use my supposed blackness as a quote unquote advantage? It would be the height of villainy, the advantage over the advantage. My role is, I think, to use my privileged white space or place to demand rights for my black brothers, or black brothers and sisters, really, ancestors and relatives. It is to raise my voice in the face of any and all prejudice and silence the prejudiced." So what she's saying here is that she already has the privilege of being considered white in Brazil. Why should she use an advantage on top of an advantage? What she's saying is, by trying to claim and take advantage of her African ancestry, even though she appears white, it's like a double advantage that she's taking advantage of. So this is someone who gets it here. Like, that's wrong for me to do that. She's never experienced racism because even though she might have African ancestry, for the most part, people perceive her to be white. The next person here, "I come from a black family that I have a lot of love and pride of belonging to. So it took me a while to understand and accept that I am not black, but it helped me to find my identity. I am not white. I am not black. I am a Brazilian mestizo with white skin. I don't suffer the racism that my cousins and uncles suffer, but I am their ally." And this is what I think would apply to most white Brazilians. They are not white in the American or European sense. They are Brazilians of mixed race who happen to have white skin. Some of them don't even have. When you compare the skin colors of American whites or Brazilian whites, you see definitely a difference. This is not to say there are in the south of the country and even in Sao Paulo, there are a lot of white people who would pass, who would be considered white. Maybe I wouldn't say pass in that same understanding, because there are millions of white people who I think would pass as white wherever they are in the world. People tend to ignore that. Like, yeah, there are a lot of white, mixed race white people in Brazil, but there are also people who have very little, if any, African, mixture with descendants of Africans. It's just a fact. I've seen it. Where am I now? This next guy, according to the IBGE, this is Brazil, the Brazilian government's, we would say Department of, Geography and Statistics. They put out all the statistics on, the population, salary and education, and hundreds and hundreds of study comes out of the IBGE every year. And so he says, according to the IBGE, I would be pardo or brown. So I identify myself as black. In the social environment where I live, people read me both ways, some as white and others as black. Most people call me brown, including my adoptive parents. I am an adoptive son and my biological mother is black. My father, I don't know. This in-between issue kills our psychology. I am much more liked within the black social community that I live in than when I go to mostly white places. I am definitely a black person. Okay, so I'm looking at the guy's picture and I'm like, I don't know who could consider this guy, white. Even he has, clearly fair skin, but his attributes, his facial features, I'm like, that's a black dude, right? I don't even know what the confusion would be there. And that's what he said at the end. I'm definitely a black person. Next commenter. I spent a lot of time yesterday talking to my fiance about it, and this post answered almost all of our questions except one. Where do pardo brown people fit in? It's a very complex subject in my mind. I've heard that saying I'm brown is wrong because that term is wrong. What she's saying is that within Black circles, people are dismissing the Pardo category, and they're just saying Pardos are part of the Black category. But I'm almost looking at it as the term mestizo, which, in essence, Pardo also means mestizo. It means a person of whatever degree of mixed race. But within Black social circles, militancy, people are saying, brown doesn't exist. It's part of the Black community. But what I've seen in my travels in Brazil over the years, I do believe that there is a mestizo category. You do have a lot of people in Brazil who you simply cannot categorize as either Black or white. Those are the mestizos in my mind. Those people of whatever mixture who look more or less Black, I don't count them as mestizos. I count those people who are just totally racially indefinable, or you just can't classify them as one or the other. Those people are mestizos to me. The people who I can look at and in my mind say that's a Black person, I consider them Black. And again, I'm willing to acknowledge that there are millions of people who you just can't classify in one side or the other. So again, she says, I've heard that saying I'm brown is wrong because that term is wrong. The other day I heard that I am Black because Black is not a color, it is a race. Colors are preto and pardo, which is Black and brown, and both are Black. Again, according to Afro-Brazilian, we'll say the social rights movement, pardo and preto are both part of the Black category. But again, that's problematic to me because we do have millions of pardos who look almost white, or some of them actually do look, they look for all intents and purposes to be white. But if you're going to classify them as brown, and brown is part of the Black category, then you've just moved in, you've transitioned a person who probably should be in the mestizo category or in the white category, and you're placing them as Black because you're defining them as brown. So it becomes problematic in that manner. This is why I say to this, I'm ready to just acknowledge that I don't think it's really possible to say how many Black people there are in Brazil. There are clearly more than 20 million, but 120 million is going a little bit overboard in my view. Now I find out that I hardly fit into the above category. So am I not Black? Am I too light to be Black? Or better yet, she says, I am too light to be Black and too dark to be white. If someone could kindly answer me, I would appreciate it. So this person sounds pretty confused. And I can understand, because when you see the plethora of phenotypes in Brazil, you can see how some people might be confused about this issue. This is a good job by this Instagram page in trying to break down Blackness, or the degree or the diversity of even the white category, because you have white people in Brazil who might jump on a plane and come to the United States, and all of a sudden people don't define them as white, right? So anyway, this is a good basis for other material that's going to be coming. I just wanted to talk about this whole question of fraud in the affirmative action system, because as I said, it's probably in the thousands how many people have been busted defining themselves as Black because they have a Black grandmother, or great grandmother or grandfather, whatever it might be. So curious to know what you thought about this article. I think only in Brazil would something like this happen. I'm quite sure you've probably had a couple of cases like this in the United States, but nowhere near as many as what you would find in Brazil. So with that said, I'm going to end the video here. Again, you want to check out the Instagram page. It's called it's by the Instagram profile Levi Kaki Effie. Don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but let me end this video here and hope to catch you guys in the next one.